Testing, testing. One, two, three. Testing, testing. One, two, three. Testing, testing. One, two, three. Testing, testing, testing. Testing, testing. One, two, three. Testing, testing. Hello? Testing, one, two, three. Oh, here we go. We are good to go. Let me go ahead and turn one of these off. We don't need all three of these. So a little bit of always a technical hiccup starting these things off. Welcome to the first. Yeah, I think this is the first episode of Together We Write for the fall 2023 semester. My name is Chris Brzezicki, assistant professor of English and Humanities here at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. Together We Write is a weekly, hopefully more regular than irregular streaming series in which we look at various types of professional writing. Most of the writing topics that we cover in this stream are relevant to my courses here on campus, although I certainly cover all sorts of topics. But this week, we're looking at SWOT analyses, and this is something that we're covering in a few of my classes. It's nice when this sort of thing happens, and so we have these sort of points of convergence. And interestingly, just on the sort of almost like a last minute decision was to add a SWOT analysis to the arts entrepreneurship course. So how do creative practitioners use a SWOT analysis? And I'm going to go over some just sort of what a SWOT analysis is, what it's used for, and also think about a variation that I'm using for the arts entrepreneurship course, clumsily referred to as a Scott analysis. So just kind of tweaked a few terms, and I'll explain why I did that in a moment. Let me go ahead and mute for a second. Running on fumes Wednesday afternoons, almost a good solid day of teaching. So usually come in with these streams with a little less energy than I like to have. So thankfully, someone invented caffeinated water, which can easily helps me get through the last few hours of the day. All right. Otherwise, just being on camera sometimes helps too. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and pull up my SWOT analysis so you can see what I'm looking at here. Let's see if I can move 10 million screens over. There we go. This is simply put, this is a SWOT analysis, right? And a SWOT analysis is simply put a easy to process, analyze, and synthesize information in like anything that involves a four quadrant rubric. I'm down with it. Anything more and it gets to be a little bit unwieldy, and anything less, it's not really all that useful. So a nice 4-part quadrant, if I can use that, I'm down with it. So SWOT analysis is really one of those. I use it in the world of business primarily. So, for example, in my professional writing for business majors courses, we do these, and this has been a standard part of the that curriculum for I mean, as long as I've been here. I've used it. I've used it in other courses for other purposes, and it really is a handy sort of handy device to consider elements, qualities, aspects, facets, whatever, of not just internal capabilities, but also external factors. Okay. So we're really trying to assess what, if we're doing sort of like a feasibility report, for example, we're going to assess whether something is, whether it's a product or, opening up a new store or a market, a restaurant in a certain area. We would conduct a SWOT analysis, much more extensive, ideally. But a SWOT analysis is a really quick, down and dirty method of getting a baseline set of ideas. Um, Relies a lot, at least in my use. We start off conducting a little observation, and then reinforcing that with research, right? So, real quick, what is a SWOT analysis? So, just to break it down, I'm going to zoomify this real quick. All right, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. These are the four areas we're looking at. What I really like about this is they're all four are equal. So I find it's important to really be thinking. It's really easy to fall into one of these and really lean into it and say, okay, well that's it. My obviously the strengths far outweigh the weaknesses, so we must be onto something. Well, the idea is really to try to be as objective as possible and be thinking of all of the ways, all the factors that could not just support the success of some endeavor or enterprise, but also those external factors as well as the internal ones. Like, what do we need to be successful with this little project? And it's something that we have done. Most of us do this either mentally or out on paper. We make a list of pros and cons, but this is really starting to get to extending that slightly so that we're thinking not just in terms of good versus evil, black and white, and all that, but really thinking about the connections between these quadrants here. Because we'll find that weaknesses are often connected to strengths, as well as threats and opportunities. There's a connection between a lot of these. And so, with the ideal situation, when we're conducting a SWOT analysis, we're looking at a situation as comprehensively as possible. So it's really important that we think of those threats, and those are external factors that will impact us, as well as leaning into those opportunities and taking advantage of them. So there's a why would this be beneficial? Well, other than assessment, and assessment is no small potatoes either. The key to really being successful is getting as a complete a picture as possible at the landscape. Okay, landscape, marketplace, seeing what sort of environment you are placing your product, process, enterprise into. Okay, so you have a pretty good idea of what those internal strengths are. Like we we can start to, if we spend a little time, we can usually identify certain areas that we're strongest in, or an organization. If we're working on behalf of an organization, thinking about, okay, what are the strengths? What are some of the assets that we bring to the table that we can speak to more confidently? We know that we can rely upon certain qualities. Like, if I were to do a SWOT analysis about something, and I should have come up with a good example, but let's say I want to, one of my favorite examples was actually from a student years and years ago. And we're doing a SWOT analysis. I can't remember the type of course we were doing it for, but, and they had it was slightly different from what the assignment was, and he said, like, I'm in the process of I want to open up a pizza joint somewhere in Milwaukee, and I don't really have. I want to. Can I use this assignment to start to get a better grasp of whether the neighborhood I'm looking at is a good fit? Absolutely. This is exactly what we're talking about. So, and so I wish I still had the example. And it might be buried somewhere, but since I was at a previous institution, I don't have access to it. And essentially, what this student did was put together um, an analysis of if he were to open up a pizza joint in this particular neighborhood. I believe it was like a neighborhood near his family. What were some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And simply put, he talked about his strengths were, he was pursuing a business management degree. And so he had a lot of training. His background was in accounting, I believe. So he had a good sense of the books. Some of the weaknesses that he had were, not knowing exactly what sort of menu he wanted. He was hoping to find someone who could put together a menu. And this was an area that, he identified as a weakness. And this struck a chord. I mean, from years of working in food and beverage, I've heard, I had one restaurateur who since failed, that there are two reasons that restaurants fail. One is a poor cook, and the other is a poor accountant. So, this was something that this student had picked up, had come to realize that although his accounting chops were good and he really liked pizza and he knew how to make one essentially, but really he needed someone in the kitchen who could handle things. So he considered this a weakness. But you start to see that, and this gets to one of my issues with the SWOT analysis, is that weakness can actually be a motivator for to become a strength. So what I like about the SWOT analysis, but it's a hard, I think it's a more difficult concept to understand, is how fluid these the borders are between these quadrants, right? So weaknesses can easily become strengths, and vice versa, I imagine, though I can't think of an example off the top of my head. If you have an accountant, for example, who's maybe a little bit more inflexible. I'm really not sure. I'm grabbing for straws here, so maybe that's not such a good idea. um, Not until I've had a little bit more caffeine, anyway. But anyway, you can start to see if I were, counting, and if I were to open up a pizza restaurant, I might say this was no kitchen experience, because anyone who's worked in the field, anyone who's worked in the back of the house of a restaurant knows that you need to have a certain skill set. You can't just know how to make something in your home kitchen. You have to work at a certain pace. You have to work, there are a number of different skills that's required. Um, but also, I'm going to stick with this example because, like I said, it's probably the one that I can recall most easily. External factors are those from the environment. You have a lot less control over them. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, those internal factors, one of the reasons it's helpful and beneficial to really think about what are my strengths, is to take stock of what you're good at. And it helps to reinforce, especially as you're constructing your mission statement or niche statement, value statement, whatever sort of professional documentation that's doing that job of self-assessment, calling forth those strengths and really putting them into practice. It's a good, simple yet often overlooked method for making something happen, is just calling it out and making it real, not just swimming around in your head somewhere, but really putting it on paper and making it official, right? So there's a benefit to this. And so really being thoughtful about what your strengths are, but also being very honest about what your weaknesses are very important. Just as important, though it might take a little bit more time to investigate and research these factors, are those that are external. What sort of things are lurking in the shadows that might inhibit our ability to succeed? But also, what other opportunities are there? Okay, so if I were to stick with the pizza uh, restaurant example, you know, Target, so so I might say this pizza joint has, there's no other one within 5 miles in either direction of the neighborhood I'm looking at. So, but I also might say, some of the threats might be uh, within delivery area. So even though there's no Domino's or Pizza Hut in the area, they certainly deliver. So that might be something that I would have to reconcile with. So these are, threats. It sounds a little bit more sinister than it actually is, but these are things that will impact an enterprise like this. So thinking about those external threats is really important because it helps mitigate those, or I should say, anticipate those issues and mitigate them as easily as possible. So, what other, new restaurants coming, and you start to just brainstorm and work through a list of scenarios that could have an impact. I mean, this is just planning, right? And most of us have some sense of planning, but this again is just a little bit more intentional, right? We're really doing our best to think up all of the things that we need to do. So I might say demographic. I have just some questions like, what are the demographics? If I have to look in a neighborhood and see, okay, what is the ideal audience for a pizza joint? I couldn't tell you. So this is where we start to think, oh, I might have to look into that, do a little bit of research, maybe hit the bricks and do some surveys. For our purposes in class, we really don't think about this too much because of the time. But you can start to see how a SWOT analysis could really lead to a much more comprehensive, extended plan to draw up and better, especially if you're coming up with a comprehensive business plan. I would argue it's a crucial component, if not one of the main components aside from financials, okay, which I do not cover in any of my classes, not my above my pay grade. So again, just to kind of recap this, our SWOT analysis is looking at both internal and external factors. And what a lot of what I focus on in classes are more individual, and but again, think about an organization. These can be much more comprehensive, right? So we're thinking about internal and external factors. We're also thinking about helpful and harmful factors. And so between those four quadrants, you can put together a pretty comprehensive list of information. So fairly straightforward, counting kitchen experience, that might be my weakness. I might be good at marketing. Might start to conventional marketing skills. Um, I can put together a flyer. That might be a strength, right? But I'm not so good at social media. So starting to identify areas where I need to either improve my own skills or find others who can help support this. So it's a really good way, especially as you're thinking of your creative practice or your in whatever sort of venture you're engaging in, really taking stock of what you got going for you and what the gaps are that you really need to fill to be successful. And maybe not even to be successful, but just to be happier with what you're doing. That could be the goal, right? So you start putting all this together, and this could get pretty long. I can show you if I don't know if I have the example handy. I don't want to take a whole lot of time looking at it. Let's see if I got one. Nope. Oh well. Anywho, um, in class, one class the other day, we drew up a pretty extensive list of opportunities and threats, and I had everyone start with that because that takes a little bit of time, conducting a little research and going from there. So um, so that's a SWOT analysis. Pretty common. I have found that a lot of people have done these before, or maybe not a lot. I would say, one out of every 10 students in my class has done one in some form or fashion and can really speak to the what you're looking for in a SWOT analysis. Now, there's something that came up at the last minute, last night. I like to get my if you're watching this for our entrepreneurship course, you've already heard me apologize for this, but I was a little bit delayed in putting my materials up because for arts entrepreneurship, the SWOT analysis is really baked in those business ovens, right? Like it's got the doing a pizza analogy now. Anyway, maybe I'm hungry. I don't know. Just ate. But the language of a SWOT analysis is a bit intense. I don't know other way of putting it. But the language of these sort of the harms and weaknesses and threats, and those terms didn't sit well with me. I don't. It's not necessarily that I'm squeamish or any sort of wallflower, but the notion that weaknesses are to these are things that we are trying to avoid or overcome. But I want to I think more along the lines of, especially when it comes to creative practice, and this I believe applies to SWOT analyses as well. But I don't, I can't speak for the discipline of business and entrepreneurship. But when it comes to creative practice, it's a little bit different, right? Maybe there are skills that need to be learned. Maybe there are uncertainties and other subjective internal qualities that need to be checked, right? Maybe there are other qualities that we can rely on. The threats, external threats are certainly real, but I would rather call them tests because threats seems a bit more um, vague to me, right? A threat could have dire consequences. It could have minor consequences. A test implies that with enough, whether it's studying, practice, whatever, with a little bit of work, you'll be successful. And I think I really am starting to feel like it's more appropriate. I don't know where that language from the SWOT analysis comes from. I should do a little digging, but I find myself being very, not just because of the terminology. I will argue that language is power, right? Once you have a command of language and you're able to use it, a lot of doors open up, right? You have many more options, many more choices, and the more you can articulate your feelings, your thoughts, and synthesize information from a number of sources, you really can accomplish quite a bit. I mean, plenty of examples of people who can manage to do that uh, without that command of power, but I'd be willing to bet that most of them have a lot of money. Um, and yeah, okay, that's another discussion for another time, I guess. But for us mere mortals, language is really a probably one of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal. Beyond that, though, beyond just tweaking a few terms, so again, for my SWOT, the Scott analysis, as I'm always a little bit iffy about coming up with new terms just on the fly like this because someone's often come up with something, and otherwise it becomes one more thing out there. And uh, but I'll own this because I can buy into it. The other part about um, entrepreneurship in general, but especially creative practice, I think that's a little bit closer to where I find myself, is really rather than thinking of weaknesses, but really areas that could either be room for improvement, but also they could actually be gifts in disguise. So, a lot of us would certainly say that our, challenge that we have, personal challenge, internal here in our little area, would be procrastination. And in a lot of ways, procrastination is part of the writing process. It's part of how we think. It's how we process ideas. So that free writing, that procrastination may be an area that we could use. Maybe this is how we think. Maybe this is how we manage multiple projects. Is it the most constructive? I'm not going to argue that right now. I would, there's plenty of work out there that backs up, procrastination, what it's in, why we're wired to procrastinate, why we're wired to do. If we're not going to be productive in one way, we'll be productive in another way. If you're like me, if I don't feel like doing something that I should be doing work wise, chances are I'm going to start baking something or working on dinner or even hours ahead of time, or who knows, still as productive, maybe even more so, but just not doing the things I'm supposed to do. Simply put, because in that moment, I'm not emotionally equipped to deal with things I don't want to deal with, right? And so, but I don't want to think of that as a weakness. I don't want to categorize that as something that's a fault or a flaw. This is something that it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that is part of who I am. Each of us has them, but how do we work them into our practice? How do we make them so that they're not a hindrance, but a positive quality? That is a challenge, right? So, hence the new label. The other area I changed, kept the T just enough to tip the hat to the original SWOT, but tests, right? And remember the SWOT analysis, the T stands for threats. I explained why I'm not terribly fond of that term, but tests is again something that can be overcome with a little bit of work, a little bit of practice. Opportunities can become tests, right? So, for example, like, what sort of opportunities are out there? We have two amazing publications here at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, Northern Lights and Sheepshead Review. Both of these are student-run journals that do amazing professional level work. So this is an opportunity for publishing. If you are a poet, any sort of writer, visual artist, there are opportunities here right on campus. And it's a fairly straightforward process to submit your work and get involved in that process of submitting work, getting a response, dealing with rejection, and dealing with publication. Like, what does this entail? There are a lot of steps involved, and so it's a really good idea. This is an opportunity if you are any type of creative writer or visual artist to start getting your work out there. I mean, as someone who realized this way too late, It's really important to go through that process and understand and get a sense of what it feels like to get rejected. I mean, that's probably one of the most valuable things, to learn how to get over that and get back on the horse, but also to know what it means to, when you submit, like making sure your materials are ready to go, making sure that your project is presentable and workable, like it's meeting all the criteria that the editor is looking for and demands. Otherwise, it could, even if it's been accepted, if it's not following those needs, it might still be rejected, or you're looking at a lot of work to make it uh, acceptable, right? So there are a number of things here. Opportunities and tests become very closely related. Okay. So do strengths and opportunities. You start to see these relationships between these quadrants a little bit more clearly the more information you put into it. And you start to say, well, publications and creative outlets, this is an opportunity, yet one of the challenges, I don't like to be rejected, right? This is a challenge. So you can start to see where these relationships start to form within the information, as long as you're being intentional about it and putting a lot of thought into it. You can really put together a good, solid um, Scott analysis. All right. If you're not in one of my classes and you're interested in this, you can hit me up via email, purzykk@uwgb.edu. Otherwise, if you are in one of my classes and you want one of these handouts, feel free to ask and I can shoot you off a copy. This one, for example, is what we did in our online arts entrepreneurship course. We're doing that this week, and really going through these steps. Now, in a classroom situation, I have time to go through all of these. So this is why I put this handout together for the online class, and really laying out, okay, first, reflection. I can't, it's hard to convince people in an online class when we don't have the time in a room together to really say, okay, now we're going to take half an hour and it's going to be really painful silence. Put your phones away, put your laptops away. We're going to think about what our strengths are. We're going to think about what our weaknesses or um, challenges are, right? Having that time is really a luxury anymore, and I really value a classroom time for that. So it is a challenge for a lot of folks who take, when I take classes online, it was because I didn't have time to go to a classroom. It was not available to me. And so in an online situation, time is crucial. So if you're watching this and you're part of one of my online classes, I strongly encourage you. Well, I sincerely hope that you're able to find the time to just let life drift away, all of your concerns, and really think about, and really have time to reflect and think. I mean, yeah, anymore, I really don't even care what you think about, as long as you're thinking about something without the distraction of screens and family and jobs and instructors sending out announcements every 5 minutes and being late with stuff. It's a challenge, right? And that's something you can put in a Scott analysis, right? If I what time do I have to devote to my creative practice, my craft, if I'm taking all of these classes. So one of the purposes of the SWOT or Scott analysis is to identify viable, achievable goals, right? If I'm finding in my SWOT analysis that my pizza joint, could encounter several problems, it will help me articulate what my goals are. Hire an experienced kitchen manager. Assemble a simple menu that appeals to the immediate neighborhood. Hire a delivery driver to take care of the 5 mile radius. There's a lot of goals, but really be thinking about what's achievable. So in a classroom situation, if you're here at UWGB, If you're a college student, those goals are a little bit more easily identified. Hey, I just want to graduate, right? But what do I have to do to get there? Well, that's what advisors are for. We put together, now I'm not an advisor, but advisors put together those plans and they lay out, which classes you should take every semester, right? But then there's the question of electives. Which electives should I be taking? Now, if you're the type of student that's going to take an elective that's easy to pass, an easy A, well, then is that really worth your money and time? Or would you take a class? So, one class I regret not taking in my life is a stats class. I'm not very good with math, but boy, it sure would come in handy. I mean, I run into situations all the time anymore where stats would be a great boon in my career. But so this is again is a weakness. Can I take a stats class? Sure, I could. I bet I could try some. Do some basic stuff. Look around online. This is something I would like to get better at. So, what are some of the reasons I haven't done it? Well, I don't have anything reminding me to do that. Did I spend 15 minutes today looking up a good resource for introductory stats? No. I have a huge pile of things I would love to do, but you know, you know what they say about intentions, right? So after you've done some reflection, you get these little tangents here, a little reflection, and you start to categorize, just like I did before. You start to categorize some of these. Okay, well, I'm starting to see a common thread, right? I'm starting to see that what I need to be better about is what I say, handling rejection. So I'm going to take advantage. I'm going to start to I'm going to synthesize this into a goal, and that goal is going to be I'm going to submit my work to 2 events or 2 publications, and I'm going to be, and I will deal with how will I deal with rejection? I will, if rejected, will not take it personally, or will, send the be sure to send the rejector a thank you notice for their consideration, something along those lines. I don't know what your goals would be in that situation. When I get rejected, I'm usually just like, okay, move on to something else. Usually pretty conscious of the reasons why it was rejected to begin with. Usually after I submit it, I go, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I should have changed that. I should have tweaked it, right? It is something to get used to. And then in a summary, what are your findings? What are some of the goals? What sort of opportunities are you going to pursue? Which threats do you need to be more informed about? Which should be tests. So this is what happens when you change things up in the last second. For this handout, I also put a bunch of sources here, but anyway, this is the rubric. That's a Scott analysis. A little revision of the SWOT analysis. Hopefully, no one's copyrighted that thing. All right, so that's the SWOT analysis, and I'm gonna. We're looking at about 3:40. Got a little bit of time yet. Feels like this is going so far so good. Let's go ahead and see if I can find an example. One thing I like to do is find examples that we can look at. I really wish I had that pizza one, but do not have that handy. All right. So the SWOT analysis is like I said, it's a pretty standard piece in my classes. I really like any sort of opportunity to do some self-reflection and think about what our goals are. It's really hard to identify goals. I mean, it's easy to say I want to do, I want to graduate, or I want to publish this, but getting there, that tends to get overwhelming. So one of the reasons we do a SWOT analysis is to start. It's a little project management technique. And so the reason we do this is not so much to identify those larger goals that loom large and can actually be kind of a hindrance because we can tune out, check out if we don't feel capable of achieving that big goal. So the SWOT analysis is really good for identifying smaller achievable goals, right? So let's go ahead. Let me see if I can find this an example. I'm going to show you a student example, and it's trying to do all the information has been removed, so it's pretty solid. Um, there are some issues here. It's not a perfect, as I always tell everyone, this is a draft, not something that is. This was revised and resubmitted much later on. So here we have. So there, for the assignment was to assess the viability of introducing Bird electric scooters to the WGB campus, and always looking for ways to change this, but it's kind of stuck with it. Um, and this is what we're looking at: SWOT analysis, introduction. But also looking at the strengths. So this person looked at profits and marketing. So these are the strengths of the company. These are the weaknesses. So there are several controversies and their reputation. There's some concern there. And also there's some opportunities here. These are the external, the convenient, and eco-friendly. In this case, we're looking at opportunities as the external factors as being the campus itself. So this is almost, not even being a part of Bird or the camp. We are part of the campus community, but we are still considering those external because the campus just being, for example, weather becomes. In fact, that might be one of them. No, a lot of students will say, well, the weather. There's only 6 months that you could possibly ride these scooters. That's when they're active, and that's a good example of an external threat, right? Because we have no control over that, and it could have an impact, right? So maintenance, safety, all that good stuff. So, and then a conclusion. And so, unfortunately, due to safety, bird scooters would not be a good addition to this campus. So, instead of goals, in this case, you're looking to make an argument. But it's also what I really like about this approach is that you put together a fairly, I don't want to say comprehensive, but it's a pretty well balanced example, right? We're looking at strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. There's two per category. One of the suggestions that I had was, a little bit at making the connections between them. Like, how would we further categorize them? Environmentally friendly, yet we might draw a connection between environmentally friendly and maintenance. We could certainly draw safety and convenience. That leads into some of the controversies that Bird has encountered. Like, these things they are on record as being somewhat unsafe. I believe it was like 40 some people have died riding these, and I don't know how many accidents, but that's our students' job to figure that out, right? For the purpose of a Scott analysis, however, let's see, where did that go? You're thinking about it a little bit differently, right? You're thinking about, okay, what are some of the opportunities in tests? The kind of research this requires is similar, not unsimilar to the SWOT analysis. In this case, you're really thinking about the market. If the test is entering a competitive market, how do you do that? How do you accomplish this? This is probably one of the more significant tests that a professional writer has to work through. So how do we mitigate that? How do we know? How do we compete in an unknown market? Well, we get to know the market a little bit. So we got to do a little bit of research and figure it out. Who do we talk to? What websites are there? There's plenty of options, but really the best thing to do, and especially in those situations, is jump in, figure it out, figure out what the market is. Who can you talk to? This is one of the reasons why being a student is such, attending college and seeing what we are nothing if not a higher education is a culmination of resources dedicated to the success of the student. So we have people here who are experts in helping others succeed in whatever path they're taking to get there, right? Um, anyway, so, but for our purposes of SWOT, Scott analysis, I wonder if there are any other versions of it floating around out there. Whatever version you're using, um, I guess the key is to really take the time to fill it out as much as you can. There are plenty of examples out there online of SWOT analysis that are pretty comprehensive. There are plenty more. I would say probably a lot more. So the majority of them are pretty quick, down and dirty, because that's the beauty of these is that it really it's not something that is aims at being comprehensive, but it what it is really grounds the intentions of the organization or the individual and paints a hopefully a clearer picture of not just the gifts and the skills and the talents and the qualities that you want to celebrate, but really thinking practically about those obstacles. And sometimes you hope those obstacles, the hurdles or whatever, are become gifts. And so the best way to do that is really thinking through them, anticipating them, and being able, again, one of the great things about being a college student is having the resources and time dedicated to mitigating those hurdles, whatever they are. So anyway, this is I think I'm going to wrap it up. Starting to get a little dry in the throat, so I'm going to go ahead and shut her down. Thank you for joining the first edition of Together We Write for the fall semester 2023. Next week we're going to look at press releases, and I think we'll stick with that. If we have time, we'll look at negative response letters using the direct buffered approach. But we'll see what else is on the agenda. So anyway, thank you. Have a great week, and I will see you next time.